Hello, how's it going everyone? So in this video, I'm going to be talking about media buyers and how to judge if they're good or bad. And all this is based off my experience of, taking in clients to where, I'm fixing basic issues that immediately skyrocket the account versus other instances where, we're taking an account from $10,000 a month all the way up to $1 million a month. And that all is based off of these principles that I use. And I've just noticed that one of the biggest sticking factors a lot of clients have to one of these concepts that I'll talk about in a little bit is they're still in the mindset of 2018, where it's, pre-iOS, everything, you can attribute, even double attribute, but still attribute things. And feed the algorithm a lot more effectively. Whereas now we're running into the issue of, okay, we don't have enough information. We have to go more off trends. And it's essentially illuminating an issue that media buying had previously, but now it's just becoming more apparent. And the reason I say this is also because come end of Q3 of 2024, the new change to Google, where we pretty much are going to remove, or at least get removed, from overall tracking of third-party cookies, right? So that means that overall conversions are going to drop off, the window's going to drop off. I mean, it's just going to be harder to see exactly what's going on. Now, the area that I see the most success in comes from tracking global numbers. And if you're curious about that, I have a previous video that details that. That'll be in the description. But anyways, jumping right into it. So what I would consider a bad media buyer or something to look out for is a media buyer that's focused purely on ROAS. And the reason why I say this, and it's also described in my previous video, is ROAS is not a indicator of success. It's more so what's being tracked in the algorithm. And it's not necessarily if that's a new user, if that's a return user, and there's a lot of mess going on there. And so they're very focused on in-app numbers, and they're looking at it from sort of like a siloed view, right? So they're seeing, okay, they're looking straight forward and saying, this is what I'm getting for the company, but there's all this other stuff going on around them that's affecting their silo itself. So what I mean by that is that if you have like a TV ad or something of that nature going on, that's going to affect their silo that they're in, right? So if you have a Google Ads media buyer that's running, Performance Max or, some, type of campaign that's more geared towards, mid-range, it could be cold, could be warm. Even if it's pure cold, there's still an instance that this could happen where you run a TV ad, you generate that demand, and then that all flows into Google, and then they're like, oh my gosh, we're doing so great. But the reality is, no, you ran that TV ad, it drew all that new traffic towards you and your business, and now Google's sort of taking credit for it per se. It's mainly just capturing the audience, but it's not necessarily the action of the media buyer. It's an action of the external sort of, I guess, halo effect, which essentially just means that if you build up awareness, it kind of bleeds everywhere else, is a short way of saying it. So like, for example, right here, I have Google is doing better than Facebook. Just look at the ROAS, sort of what I just talked about. And then it rates their success off their media buying channel versus your business, right? So for example, if we do an ad and it launches out and we say, okay, like I just said, TV ad, and we notice, hey, we're getting overall like sales are increasing on our end. We're seeing Google doing a lot better. This person is going to be siloed, like I just talked about, and focused on just their own ad itself, not, the full channel. Another thing as well too is it can be negatively affected by the channel, right? So for example, if you're doing nano TV and starts doing bad, or you turn it off, then you notice, oh my gosh, the media buyer starts freaking out. What's going on with Google? I don't understand. We were doing so great before, and now we just dropped off. I didn't change anything drastic. What's going on? If they're a good media buyer, they'll probably ask you if there's anything that you've changed inside of your business that would affect them. If they're not a good media buyer, then they're probably focused on just, saying, okay, we're going to do this test and see if this solves this problem, versus asking you first if there's any reason as to why their channel could be affected, because that can lead into some insights for them to say, hey, we're actually too warm, meaning that we're getting a lot of repeat customers. We're not going after those new customers on our channel. A lot of nuances in here, and so I'm trying not to rabbit hole. I tend to do that, but they pretty much stick to their own silo, and like it says right here, only follows their SOPs, right? So they say, hey, this has worked for the majority of accounts. We're not changing it. I don't care what you say, what your business model is. We're sticking to what our SOPs are. And then there's ego involved, and you don't necessarily have a developing relationship where you're using them as sort of like your omni-channel sort of team. You're more so just, they're more so, I guess, off on their own little island, and they're not communicating with you to understand what's going on with the full business. And they don't lean into that. They don't lean into remarketing that might be good in some instances and build from there. So essentially, All this comes down to is a bad media buyer is focused on ROAS and is siloed and is not looking at the full picture of your business. Whereas, as you can assume, a good media buyer is focused on global numbers, meaning that they're focused on overall MER, NCAC, what's your LTV, are you profitable, meaning do you have money in your bank account? Pretty basic stuff that I feel like some agencies don't focus on, and I'll give you instances as to how to track the performance of an agency in a moment here. But yeah, so that's kind of one of the biggest things. And then they think of channels as partners, right? So we, as media buyers, should be thinking of Facebook, and Google and TikTok and TV ads and organic and CRO testing, all this kind of omni-channel networks as partners. And as we're working together, we're not necessarily trying to outcompete one another to then say, oh, our agency is doing better than your agency and vice versa, right? It's our job as media buyers to kind of bring the lines together, or the strings together, I guess, however you want to say that, of what affects Facebook, what affects Google, how do they both talk to one another in the sense of, if I increase budget on Facebook, do I see Google get better? And so there's a lot more nuances that kind of come in mind there that even third-party apps don't even track. And so with a good media buyer, they look at things more holistically and they're not as siloed. They're more so asking you, meaning that if they're not controlling a certain part of your business on the top of funnel marketing side of it, are you running TV ads, like I said? And then if you are, oh, okay, we noticed there was an increase on Google, it's probably from the TV ads. Let's see what happens. I'm not going to touch Google and see if the TV ads keep performing, kind of thing. Because like I said, attribution is a big issue. And like I said, if you have one, and this is what we do and what I believe a lot of other agencies that think like this do, is they adjust budgets across both mediums, not just one. And what I mean by that is that if they notice, let's say you have a $10,000 a day budget, you have $5,000 in Google and you have $5,000 in Facebook. And you're like, okay, we noticed based on, our back end that Facebook has more new cold traffic than Google. We're going to pull X amount of budget from Google over to Facebook and then get results from there. And it's up to the media buyer to essentially find those paths. And it's one of those things to where as a client, you want to understand it, but sometimes when it comes into the whole entire structure of, well, Google looks better, but there's a reason why we're doing this for Facebook. And so when you get into the explanation thing, it's sort of, I don't mean this to be rude, but it's sort of like asking your surgeon, why are you using this scalpel versus this scalpel kind of thing. There's a lot more that goes into it than just, hey, this is a cause because of this. It's more so, hey, based on the trends we see in other accounts, we found this correlation as well too, and here's the accounts based on history, and then this is how we got there, and this is the correlation that we're seeing there. There's a lot more experience that goes into it versus just a, hey, this caused this kind of thing. And don't worry, I know what you're thinking. Probably thinking, well, how the heck do I track all this information? I'll get into that in just a second here. So going over that, like I said, understands omnichannel, has no ego with their tests, meaning that if, they're coming at it from the perspective of, you're giving them information about your business so they can better market it for you. And then they're saying, okay, you know what, maybe this SOP is not going to work, right? Maybe this typical campaign build is not going to work for your business because we're noticing the correlation of, I don't know, XYZ, maybe Google, search isn't working well, so we need to go over to YouTube or just go into Remark, whatever the case may be. It's an area that, I find a lot of media buyers being focused on their SOPs too much and not necessarily looking at it from your perspective as a client, right? Looking at what do you need, not what works for the majority of other clients. There is still a need for that, but it's not necessarily something that you want to die on that hill as a media buyer. And then the last thing that I want to cover is the human psychology aspect of it, right? Because one of the biggest things is marketing's been around forever. Whether it's been specifically for, advertising on like a billboard or, sales, whatever it may be, it's been around forever. And when it comes to the human psychological side of things, we haven't changed in the way that we buy things from a drastic perspective versus the actual tools that we use to get the message across. And so what a good media buyer will do is look at it from a general marketing perspective and not just an algorithm perspective. I find myself doing this sometimes where I'll be looking at it from an algorithm perspective, meaning that I'll say, oh, I know this works for this account in a similar niche. I really need to just give it some more time for it to work. And yes, there is some instances where that makes sense, but the biggest thing is, does your offer line up with your target audience? At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. are you getting to the right audience for the right amount of cost at the right time, and are you getting that return? Are you capturing it? Is it working? Is your funnel working in the most proper way, or is it one of those things to where you're just throwing whatever out there based on SOPs? Psychology is a really, really big factor, and I think that it's extremely underutilized from the ad buying perspective, and more so focused on the creative perspective. And I think those two need to get married a lot more. So one of the things you're probably wondering now is, well, how do we know what's a good versus bad agency, right? Because if we're focused on global numbers, yes, but we don't know if it's you that's causing those global numbers. Totally understand that. So I made this other side of thing where essentially, how do you track results? So the first thing that I want to say is, if you are a good media buyer and you're using global numbers, the idea is the more that you control, the more leverage you have over the effects of those global numbers, which means the overall, amount that you can say, okay, I caused that, or I helped cause that. And that's the health of my work, or the source of my work is, coming from and getting that result for you, kind of thing. So what I mean by that is that if you control, if you're managing, if your agency or whatever it is, if your agency is managing Facebook and Google, then they have more leverage to say, hey, focus on global numbers, versus if you're an agency that only focuses on Google, only focuses on Facebook, whatever it may be, you have less leverage to say, hey, I caused those results on the global number side of things. And then it's hard for a client to judge, well, your ROAS is lower, and that's kind of the default that they go to, is your ROAS is lower than their ROAS, so you must be worse than them, or something of that nature. And that's not how media buying works, right? There's omni-channel, things overlap all the time. And so when you look for an agency, you want to go into the mindset of, okay, this agency, if they measure global numbers, they need to have control over my social, meaning my outbound social and my outbound Google, in order to have an influence that actually is impactful and I can track it. And it's not one of those things where it's like, hey, here's Google and here's Facebook, one's better than the other. They both work together, and an agency that works through all those nuances brings you to a better global number on the new customer acquisition side, or the MER side, or both, or an LTV side, whatever that sort of KPI is for you. And so the best thing that you can do for that is saying, okay, if you're going to run my Facebook and Google, then I'm going to say, okay, if you get the NCAC down to XYZ, or you drop the NCAC, meaning how much we're paying for new customers, then I'll be happy with the results, and we can keep going on your way, right? Because you're responsible for both mediums, not just one. And so right here, like I said, make sure media buying is under one roof as close to possible, or as close to as possible. Meaning that if you are doing TV ads, if you can get a media buyer that also does TV ads, that'd be perfect. So it's just one meeting all under one roof. And then the other thing, and this is kind of, I guess, more of it comes off as mean, and I don't mean it that way, but it's a very, I get this kind of question in my head sometimes where I'm like, well, I don't understand why this is happening. But when it comes to omnichannel marketing, I say leave the omnichannel media buying to the person you paid. And so what I mean by that is that if you're going in for surgery and you have a doctor that's operating on you, you're not telling the doctor, use the scalpel, use the scalpel, use the scalpel, right? And there is, a space for the creative side of it, and understanding okay, this creative's not working and there's dialogue. I'm not saying that's not the case. I'm saying that if there is a agreed upon KPI, like global NCAC, global MER, and you have a media buying agency that's controlling both of those, then in that omni-channel relationship, you should not have to worry about that. They should be the ones that take responsibility for that, and then they show you those top line numbers that go into your bank account that then drive you into that next step into your monthly profitability. And if that's not the case, if they're not doing that, then that's their problem, right? That's their issue. Now, from an LTV perspective, that gets a little bit more complicated, but that'll be probably something for a later video. I would say from a media buying perspective, NCAC and MER are probably the two main things that you should focus on whenever you look for another agency. So anyways, hope this video was good, made some sense. I know I kind of ramble a little bit, but I just want to give you guys some insight as to how to think about, or at least how I like to think about what makes a good agency versus a bad agency, and how to kind of pick and how to hold them accountable. So anyways, thanks again, and I'll see you guys later.